Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 30. This episode of Digital Mindfulness is brought to you by Semantica Research, a leading media intelligence company that helps communications, social media, and marketing professionals make better and more informed business decisions from digital data. Hello and welcome to Digital Mindfulness, where my guest today is Noah Church. Noah is the author of the book Whack, Addicted to Internet Porn, and has his own history with porn addiction, but now dedicates himself to helping others escape addiction. Having discovered porn at the age of 9, Noah wrote about his experience coming away from it in his book, and it looks at current research into porn addiction. So Noah, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Absolutely, Lawrence. I'm glad to be here.
So, Noah, I've just given everyone a brief introduction to you. I'm wondering if you can give the audience a bit more of an introduction to yourself.
Well, like you said, my name is Noah B.E. Church, and that is part of what I do now. It's not everything. I'm a wildland firefighter, an EMT, and a large part of what I do is write and speak publicly about porn addiction and coach people who are trying to recover from porn-induced problems. I had a degree in creative writing, and I always envisioned myself writing novels, but instead my first book turned out to be about my own experience with porn addiction and recovery. And I'm 26, which is significant because I was among the first generation to grow up in the era in which it was common for a home to have a computer and internet access. And that is very significant for many reasons. You've created a whole show about it, and I'm sure you know more about it than I do. But especially for myself, it was significant for my sexuality because I grew up with porn before growing up with real sexual experiences. And looking back, that really shaped not only my sexual nature, but my emotional and my social nature as well. It was a little over 2 years ago now that I saw the video, Gary Wilson's TED Talk called The Great Porn Experiment. Have you seen that, Lawrence?
I have, yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah, for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen it, I recommend you watch it after listening to this podcast. But that really opened my mind to just how much my life had been affected by my porn habits. And it made me realize not only that I had to quit for myself, but also that I felt like I had a responsibility to share this information because as people, especially of my age and younger, they look at porn as, well, number one, very common, which is true, and number two, harmless, which isn't necessarily true. So I wanted to educate people, and I saw it sort of like tobacco was seen 50 years ago. And it was very common, it was relaxing and fun, and it was pretty harmless. But of course, we realized in time that tobacco wasn't necessarily harmless. And I haven't seen anything to link porn to cancer, but there are other negative impacts that I thought people should know about. So I decided to write a book and start speaking about it, and that's how I got to where I am today.
I guess my first question is, was it really the TED Talk that made you kind of think a little bit more about what you were experiencing? Insofar as how did you know that you were addicted to porn? Was it simply the amount of time you were spending watching it, or were there other signs that you thought, oh my God, like, there's something else happening here?
Well, for 15 years, I didn't know that I was addicted to porn, and I would have laughed at that suggestion. I thought it was just something I did because I enjoyed it. And it wasn't even that TED Talk that made me realize I was addicted. It was the research I did afterward that made me have to face that fact. And it wasn't that I was using porn an inordinate amount of time. I know there are people out there who go on 6 or 8 hour binges. That usually wasn't me. There were many days when I wouldn't use it at all. Some days, once or twice, occasionally, 3 or 4 times maybe. And each session would be half an hour to 45 minutes in length. But I looked up the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by the American Psychiatric Association. And in that manual, there's a section on addiction. And there's a test, and this is designed for substance addiction, but it's 11 criteria, and you go through and you make a tally mark for each one that applies to you. And if 2 to 3 apply to you, it's generally classified as a mild addiction. 4 to 5 is moderate, and 6 or more is a severe addiction. So I just adjusted these to apply to pornography use or behavioral addictions rather than substance abuse. And these are things like you have several times expressed that you would like to quit or reduce your use, but have been unsuccessful. You experience strong cravings. You continue using despite knowing that whatever you're using is consistently causing or worsening social or interpersonal problems. And another interesting one is you have acquired a tolerance and need more lengthy, varied, or extreme porn to feel the same or similar pleasure as when you first started using. And I went through this list and I realized that 9 of the 11 applied to me. So at that point, I really had to admit that it was an addiction for me.
Because in the previous interview that we had with Fiona Atwood, one of the things that I remember her saying was that this is oftentimes, internet porn is oftentimes the gateway into sexualizing people, particularly young people. It's their first experience of sex, and it's interesting to listen to what you just said, and especially by reading your book, that actually there is something else going on. Like there are kind of there's kind of psychological there are real psychological effects that are happening with this. And when you linked the whole use of porn to, you linked it to tobacco use, I'm not sure a lot of people equate the two. They don't see it as dangerous or certainly as addictive as tobacco, but you would say that that's the case.
In terms of being addictive, yes, I would. I don't think pornography is usually deadly like tobacco can be, but it can have really powerful consequences. For me, for example, and for many others who have found out that they were addicted, the problem that led them to seek help was something called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. And from when I first tried to have sex as a teenager up until my adult life after I quit porn, I was completely incapable of having actual sex. And that is because I later realized after watching that TED Talk, years of using internet porn, which is an unnaturally powerful sexual stimulus because we can see as many attractive mates as we want in a short amount of time doing whatever we want. That unnaturally powerful stimulus actually neurologically changed my brain. It desensitized me to sexual stimuli, so that when I actually had a naked girl that I was attracted to in my bed, it just wasn't enough to physically arouse me.
So what were some of the triggers that you became aware of that led you to the overuse of porn, would you say?
Well, there were many things. At first it was just curiosity. I was a kid, I was horny, I wanted to see attractive women, so I would search for pictures and videos. As time went on, it became more of a escape, more of a easy way out, rather than putting myself out into the world and asking girls out, trying to explore real intimacy and real relationships. It was easier for me just to stay in and find sexual satisfaction in pornography. And then it became something like a salve. When I was feeling bad or lonely or depressed, I could just turn to porn and completely forget about all those problems because the porn was powerful enough to push all that out of my head, at least until that session was over. So it became certainly an emotional crutch for me. And I see that pattern with a lot of addictions, whether to pornography or otherwise.
I was in doing my research for this. I've seen online that there's a really huge and active community, like the NoFap community. Mm-hmm. And do you see this? I wouldn't even say an attitude, but a growing awareness of the effects of internet pornography. Do you see that as kind of becoming more of a groundswell?
I certainly hope so. That's my whole mission, is to try to educate people as to the potential negative effects of porn so that they can make their own informed choices. If I had known when I was starting that it would cause me to be unable to have real sex, I don't think I would have gotten into porn nearly as much as I did. And NoFap, I believe they're at about 170,000 members right now, which is amazing. I'm sure not all of those members are active, but they have gotten quite a bit of mainstream media attention. And I think Gary Wilson's TED Talk has gotten millions of views, I think around 5 or 6 million by now, which makes me really happy because just like tobacco half a century ago, people need to know about this.
So let's go back. So for those people listening who don't know, how does porn affect habitual users in general?
Well, we don't know everything that porn does to the human brain, but there are quite a few studies out now in the last really 5 to 8 years that are showing us that it does have many of the same consequences as other addictions to substances. Like in 2011, I believe there was a study at Cambridge that brought in people and showed them porn and while scanning their brains with an fMRI. And they saw that people who were heavy pornography users, who would self-identify as addicts, demonstrated much stronger responses in the area of the brain responsible for desire and motivation. So they had a stronger response to the pornography, meaning they felt a stronger desire than the people who were not heavy porn users. And also, we see in all cases of addiction, this was first noticed in substance addiction, but later verified to also occur in internet addicts, we see something called hypofrontality, which is a shrinking and a weakening in the frontal lobe of the brain, which, among other things, is responsible for self-control and rational thought, willpower. So this part of the brain is shrinking, and the part of the brain responsible for our baser desires, lust, is growing more powerful. And that's why we see that addicts have such a hard time controlling themselves and quitting, even when they know rationally that it's not good for them and that they want to quit.
So would you say, again, just looking at the online communities, etc., and a lot of the literature that I've read, would you say that this is a condition that primarily affects men, or is it women too in equal numbers?
Good question. Well, a study that I saw, among many others, said that 87% of United States college males regularly use porn, whereas for women that number is 33%. So we do see that women in general seem to be less drawn to pornography use. And whenever you're speaking about traits of the sexes, you're always speaking generally in trends. It doesn't apply to everyone, obviously. Just because you're a man doesn't mean you'll be attracted to using porn. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you won't be. But we do find that more women report to be sexually aroused by the intimacy, by the story, by getting to know someone and falling in love, whereas more men report to be more sexually aroused by visual stimuli, like we see in pornography. So I do believe that males tend to be more vulnerable to this addiction, but there are also many women who fall into the same trap, who are very much interested in pornography, and they can develop much the same problems as men. They obviously won't develop porn-induced erectile dysfunction, but they will develop reduced libido for real partners like men do, or desensitization to more natural stimuli during real sex. One thing that I had after I recovered from PIED, I still had a real hard time reaching orgasm during actual sex and feeling those sensations as fully as I should. And it took me about a year to reach the sensitivity that I thought I should be at and to be able to reach orgasm consistently during sex in a reasonable amount of time. And women find the same thing, that once they quit using porn and quit using sex toys as well, because a vibrator provides much more stimulus than a penis and can desensitize physically the genitalia more than just using porn would. But once they quit using those things, they find that they have a much easier time getting into real sex and having orgasms with their partners. And another interesting thing is that for women, many of them have a much shorter refractory period after orgasm, which means that period of recovery. So a man, he might use porn once and afterwards lose interest in sex and move on with his day. Whereas for a woman, she might be more vulnerable to just binging for hours and hours because of her potential for multiple orgasms.
Would you say though that the because you were saying how it's like 87% of men have reported that they've used online porn. Would you say that those numbers reflect the fact that it's basically porn is like a male-dominated industry, that a lot of the porn is kind of made by men for men?
Well, that number was actually 80% of men are regular users.
Oh, regular users. Oh
A
God.
higher number have used it at all. But I think absolutely most porn is geared toward being visually pleasing to men. There are pornography productions that are geared to be more pleasing to a majority of women. I think there is a website called Make Love Not Porn that is geared toward a less visceral and abusive method of portraying sex than we see a lot of porn nowadays. Going online and looking at the porn that's available now, a lot of it is abusive and violent and caters to a lot of extreme fetishes. And I believe that that's because the audience has been desensitized to images of more vanilla sex. And myself, as I was growing up and exploring internet pornography, at first, all I would need to get as aroused as I wanted to be was a picture of a pretty lady. It didn't even have to be a naked pretty lady. But as time went on, those became boring, and I kept escalating to more extreme content until I was watching stuff that would have disgusted me years earlier, but now I needed that extreme content to arouse me to the same level. And I believe that that's happening on a mass scale to pornography users in general.
And of course now, like because the internet and high-speed internet is just so ubiquitous now. Like kids can get access to this much earlier than, I mean, you were 9 when you said you first experienced this, but kids can get access to this, very early on, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And usually the children in the household are more tech savvy than the parents. So even if there's a child blocker on the internet, it's likely that the child will be able to find a way around it if he or she really wants to. And even if not, they have a peer group whose parents are probably less stringent about it. The average age, I believe, of first exposure to pornography, whether intentional or unintentional, is 11. So yeah, kids are being exposed to this early, and not everyone is going to become addicted, obviously, but there are many who do.
Do you think, Noah, that there's an argument to be had that seeing as kids are getting exposed to this world, or the potential to be exposed is like that much earlier, that I guess parents can kind of use this, or adults can use this as an aid to help educate kids?
I think for most of human history, people were able to figure out sex, for the most part, just fine without first watching videos of it. I think that sex education is very important in as far as educating people as to what sex is, what happens biologically, what healthy relationships look like, and also what healthy, safe sex looks like. And I do believe that part of that sex education needs to be about healthy online habits and the potential consequences of porn use. And I believe in your country, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that now internet service providers automatically block adult content unless you opt in.
They block a lot of stuff, but yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and yeah, a lot of the mainstream internet service providers, they do block content like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think, my knee-jerk reaction is just to say, well, if you can do that with porn, then what else can you do that with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your experience of the web decreases, and that's just on the whim of what someone says that is, I'm not allowed to watch, so it's not exactly kind of like free information. It's always kind of getting curated by someone else. But on the other hand, I think that so few people are schooled or are aware or mindful enough of their digital activities that I do think in some cases that you do need a nanny, as it were, a digital nanny. We do need some people that are that are able to say, do you know what, this is, this content is, pretty shocking or pretty graphic. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's a good thing having these blockers?
Well, it's true that as an adult with your name on the account, you can call your ISP and just say, hey, I want to access everything. Don't block anything from my internet, right? So I believe that that's a good move, because children, especially 9 or 10-year-olds like I was, I don't believe that I was knowledgeable or wise enough at the time to be exposed to the kind of pornography that I was exposed to. Especially at that time, I was using Kazaa or LimeWire to download porn videos, and you didn't always know what you were going to get. So I was exposed to bestiality and potentially illegal pornography that I didn't actually want to see. So I think that preventing children from accidentally stumbling onto that, or even intentionally stumbling onto that, while they're under the age of majority is a good idea. I do not believe that we should be banning anything altogether, banning pornography or any other type of online content, because I don't think that will do much good. It's like prohibition. If people want it, they're going to get it, and banning it just opens up a black market for this type of thing and doesn't actually solve any problems. I think the most important thing is to educate people about the potential consequences and educate parents about how they can talk to their children about this sort of thing. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about just that because I thought it was that important.
And, just kind of to finish off on that chapter, like, how would you recommend parents do talk to their children about this? Because this is not an easy topic to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you're right. And dealing with children and telling them about internet pornography is not easy, but there are actually people who go into first and second grade classrooms and talk about pornography. And you can look up videos of this on YouTube. There are ways to talk about pornography to children in which it doesn't damage their sensitivities or get too uncomfortable. You can talk about, well, when a man loves a woman, and of course you first have to talk about sex before you could talk about pornography. You talk about when a man loves a woman and when a woman loves a man, they become a pair, and in order to create a child or to enjoy their intimacy with each other, they have sex. And we talk about the biological functions of sex. And then, so that online, you can find images or videos of people doing this, and people do it for entertainment. But these are the potential consequences. And just go through, you can be desensitized to real sex. You can, if it gets to the point where you're using it consistently over years, you can become unable to have real sex. And I don't think that this should be done in a way to scare kids away from pornography, even though it might do so. But these are the facts, and I don't think that children should be guarded from the facts.
I mean, and kind of just going on from that again with the facts, in your book you say that porn clearly has physiological and psychological effects on the brain that some people might not be aware of. What are these? Because this was fascinating when I read this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I already talked a little bit about how the sexual response is desensitized after years of using internet porn. But what I didn't say is that, so when we see something exciting, like an attractive mate or some fatty foods, what's released in our brain, among other things, is dopamine, which is this neurochemical that gives us the feeling of desire, feeling of being pulled toward some outcome, toward looking at pornography, toward gambling, toward substances, but also toward healthy things like exercise, cake, or, well, not cake, but fatty foods, and social relationships. But when that system is desensitized from this powerful stimulus, it desensitizes everything else in your life. And this isn't something I realized in myself until I quit porn. And I see this story echoed in a lot of other people who quit, that they become more passionate about everyday things. They become more interested in their work. Colors are brighter. They're more interested in eating well and exercising. They're more interested in the people around them and really getting to know people and making new friends. They're more motivated, more ambitious. They can think more clearly. And this is all... Have you ever read The Power of Habit?
By Charles Duhigg.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have.
He talks about keystone habits, in which you change one habit and that sort of starts a chain reaction that allows you to change your whole life. One example he gives is this woman who decides to quit smoking, and after quitting smoking, she starts eating better, exercising more, focuses on her career and making her dreams come true. And I think it's because by quitting smoking, she's in part teaching herself how to change herself. She's teaching herself how to be the architect of her own life. And for a lot of guys quitting porn, not only are their brains healing and resensitizing, but they're also training themselves like you train a muscle. They're training their willpower, and they're training their ability to self-reflect and change their own lives. So we see a lot of these guys who quit porn, all of a sudden they start having all these other wonderful changes in their lives. They're meeting new partners, they're getting into new relationships, they're pursuing their dreams, and they're getting a lot more done.
In my previous interview with Fiona Atwood, she mentioned that it wouldn't be entirely accurate to use the word addiction when speaking about porn. And I know that you would disagree with this, but why is this the case?
Well, I did listen to that episode, and I remember that point when she said that, and I knew that it would probably come up because I do very much disagree with that. Well, I think it's important to look at what the definition of addiction is if we're going to talk about whether or not habitual pornography use can be an addiction. And the definition I use is the one by the American Society of Addiction Medicine, which is: addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Addiction is characterized by inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors and interpersonal relationships, and a dysfunctional emotional response. Like other chronic diseases, addiction often involves cycles of relapse and remission. Now, from working with a lot of guys and girls who have been recovering from pornography addictions, I don't see a single part of that definition that doesn't apply to these people. And in my own recovery, recognizing that I was an addict, I think was essential to changing how I related to pornography, because it made me realize, okay, this is what's been happening in my brain. This is why it's sometimes really hard for me to resist these urges, despite, even before watching Gary Wilson's TED Talk, suspecting that pornography had a lot of negative impacts on me. Even knowing that, I would still go back to it, and now I could finally understand why, and being empowered with that knowledge and that education allowed me more ability to change my life. And I find the same with other people.
So in the Taoist and the Vedic traditions, they view masturbation as a loss of vital energy and fluids. And I was wondering, because you were saying that for 15 years you didn't even know that you're addicted, but did you feel that, in reflecting on that time, did you feel as though you had less spiritual or physical energy to live your life?
Yes and no. I'm not a scholar of Taoist or Ayurvedic traditions, and I don't know much about that philosophy that semen is a spiritual essence, that it's a life force, and that getting rid of it drains you of life. But looking back, talking about all those brain changes that I was talking about, I know that from the age of about 10, when I started using porn, till the age of about 24, I didn't cry a single time. And that, looking back, I was proud of that at the time. I thought it meant that I was manly, but I think looking back, it meant that I was just desensitized and incapable of fully experiencing the emotional realm and experiencing this world. Using porn and masturbating all the time, it didn't hold me back from being a functioning member of society. I was still doing well in school. I was valedictorian in my high school, and I was still doing other activities, and I had some friends. But I could have done much more, I know, if I hadn't been using porn. And often I would do exactly what I needed to do and no more, because why would I do more when instead I could feel the pleasure of using internet porn?
So, do you think then, because porn is becoming way more ubiquitous now, do you think that the technology companies themselves or the porn companies have a responsibility to educate, as you were mentioning before?
Well, I wouldn't trust the pornography companies to educate our children, for one. Technology companies, I think that they have a responsibility to comply with the laws, but I don't think it's their responsibility to censor or educate on their own. Like in Britain, I think the technology companies have the responsibility to comply with what the people want, which is apparently for the ISPs to block that content unless people opt in. But I don't think it's their responsibility to educate. I think that falls to our public school system and even more importantly to the parents.
It's funny, isn't it? Because ISPs, people believe, and there was a whole discussion of this at Davos at the World Economic Forum, that technology companies have a responsibility to combat extremism, right? And to take off extremist content off the web and, work against the fight against ISIS. And I thought that was interesting, that whole discussion, because that whole discussion bleeds onto tech companies controlling the flow of information just through algorithmically. So I was just wondering again how people think that one form of internet communication is bad for us, and then you've got pornography content, and you're saying that this pornographic content really has measurable effects on people's brains.
Well, there's a great difference, I believe, between what ISIS is doing. I don't really want to get into that because that's a huge conversation. But what they're doing is inciting people to violence, which isn't going to just harm the person exposed, but also harm other people. Whereas with pornography, like with other, what would we consider vices, it's entertainment. It might be fun for some person. It might damage other people who choose to use it. But this is a personal choice. And we were talking about addiction being a disease, but it's not a disease like malaria or something that you contract completely not of your own fault. It's a lifestyle disease like hypertension, high blood pressure. It's something that you can develop without really realizing that you were harming yourself, but also if you make the right choices, you can cure yourself of it. With hypertension, you can eat right, exercise, and lower your high blood pressure. With pornography use, you can educate yourself and make the right choices and free yourself of that addiction.
So there's a whole online culture, as I was mentioning before, that's against the addiction to porn, the NoFap community. How do you think that this community got so popular, and what do you think's driving that popularity?
Well, I think that it started to get popular because a lot of guys were looking for answers as to why, when they were young, healthy men, their penises weren't working during sex. I remember, I forget what website that was, something like MedHelp or something. There was a topic about why isn't my erection working that had something like 64,000 responses. And because there wasn't yet a community for people to be talking about this, they were on MedHelp, everyone wondering, well, what is going on? And then it came out that, well, we all have in common this years of consistent pornography use. Maybe this has something to do with it. So there are people out there who are suffering with these problems who are looking for answers. I was looking for answers after I first tried to have sex and couldn't, but all I was finding at that time in 2008 was that it was probably performance anxiety. And I was nervous about it being my first time, and that was getting in the way of my sexual arousal. But no matter how many times I tried to get more comfortable having sex with however many different women in the next few years, that problem was never solved. It was never solved until I quit using porn. So I knew that pornography was the real root cause of that, not performance anxiety. So a lot of people looking for answers. And then since, especially NoFap, people have started to talk about all the other benefits in their lives that come about rather than just recovering from a sexual dysfunction. Like we were saying, people are becoming more ambitious, more motivated. They are changing their lives. And that sort of hope that this one keystone behavior that you can change your whole life, that's really infectious, and it can attract a lot of people.
Because there are loads of guys just sharing their experiences about this online, and it's really funny because you and I were just speaking about how difficult this conversation might be for parents to have with their kids, but you've got guys just speaking about something that's really intimate about them, and it's they kind of saying it as like a badge of honor. They're really proud in terms of how much motivation and energy that they have. It was really interesting.
Yeah, well, the internet is great at allowing you some measure of anonymity so you can more honestly express your thoughts. The amount of people who have come out and actually shown their faces and voices to tell their stories about this is much lower, which is why I thought it was important for me to do that and try to give a face to these problems. But these online forums really offer great communities of support for a lot of people. That's how I started sharing my story, was on a forum called Your Brain Rebalanced.
So, for anyone who may be going through a difficult time, what are some of the recommendations you would give to them to try and overcome their experience?
A lot of people who are giving up porn and masturbation, or they've just joined NoFap for the first time and they're trying out the challenge, they just quit masturbating, quit using porn, and sit around doing nothing or playing video games, waiting for the changes to take effect, waiting for their erections to come back. But that's not really maximizing the full potential of this journey. I think that if you really want to stay away from pornography in the long term, you have to fill the void that is left by it. For a lot of guys, pornography has a big place in their life. It's like I used it. It was an emotional salve. It was entertainment. It was something to keep the loneliness at bay or the depression or whatever. And without that, you have to find something more healthy to fill that void. For me, part of that was sharing my story and helping other people recover. That was a part of my recovery, was helping others. It's important to find some passion, some purpose in your life. And with that passion and that purpose, it's much easier to stay away from porn and have a successful recovery. And the other thing is educate yourself. If you don't know the common aspects of addiction and recovery, you're going to have a much harder time going through it. If instead you know, okay, I'm feeling really emotional right now, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling depressed, it's been 2 weeks since I've masturbated or looked at porn. If you know that this is common, that emotional turmoil as you quit and go through withdrawals is a common thing, it'll be easier to wait it out and know that on the other side you'll be calmer and happier, rather than not knowing that anybody else has gone through this and thinking, well, this is just how it's going to be from now on. I'll always be frustrated and angry and depressed.
Gosh, this is I don't know. This just to me is just really, really fascinating because you've used one word, but you've used it quite a lot through the interview, and this kind of like loneliness or this whole idea of filling the void. It's just this whole idea of solitude, right? That it's this, like you say, this kind of absence of other people that kind of leads people to do this, and this whole idea of loneliness being linked to this. Not just addiction to porn, but addiction to like screen time in the internet and stuff like that. This is something that comes up again and again in the interviews that I've had. And would you say that this definitely that it would play into or is an element of internet porn addiction?
Absolutely. Are you familiar with the Rat Park experiment?
I'm not, no. What is that?
Oh, well, when we were first studying addiction decades ago, we would test mice and rats. We would, for example, provide them with cocaine-laced water and give them cocaine for several weeks and then take them off and see what happened. And given the choice to go back to cocaine or just drink regular water, those addicted mice would drink the cocaine. But what they didn't do is provide these mice with a healthy environment. They were just in a cage with cocaine. If you're alone in a prison cell, basically, you're going to grasp at whatever will make you feel better. But in later years, researchers got mice or rats addicted to substances and then put them into what they called Rat Park, which is this community of other rats where they have toys to play with and plenty of good food and company, people or rats to meet. And these rats who were addicted to cocaine, who were placed in this more healthy environment and had other people or other rats to support them, they were able to quit their addictions. There would be a bottle of cocaine-laced water available in Rat Park, and the addicted mice would choose not to use it. And they would go through withdrawals for a few days, and then they would be healthy rats again.
That is really fascinating, because then I guess some people would say then that kind of going on and using online social networks would be a proxy for the absence of socialization, right? The absence of other people. But in your experience or in your research, does that help, having these online social networks?
Yes, it does. But like anything, the internet is a tool, and how you use it, depending, it can be very healthy and helpful, or it can be unhealthy and unhelpful. People who have these real life support networks, who have friends who love them, who have perhaps a significant other with a healthy relationship, who have a good support system, a purpose, passion, a job that they like, they're much more likely to leave behind addiction than someone who's really dissatisfied with their lives, doesn't have very many friends, and all they really have to make them feel better is their addictive substance of choice.
It's almost like take the help where you can get it. So it doesn't matter whether it's a virtual or in-person support network. Once you become mindful, I guess, of your behavior and your relationship to online porn, the steps that you take to mitigate that can be anything. So they can be virtual, they can be in person, but the important thing is that you take steps.
To an extent, yeah. These online communities, they can be great because people can see that they're not alone. They can learn about what their journey is going to be like, what other people have gone through. They can talk to people who have gone through the same thing and get support. But just hanging out in these forums all the time for your only source of support, I don't think is healthy either. I always recommend to people that they find people in real life to tell, especially if you have a significant other or someone you're getting to know and sex is starting to come up as a possibility and you're still recovering from PIED or another sexual dysfunction. I always recommend being honest with people about this. And people are always so afraid to let down their shield and show people what they're struggling with, the ugly parts of their past, their faults. But I find that the vast majority of the time that people do this, people aren't disgusted by it. They admire the courage that it took to open up.
Noah, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the interview. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I have a website. It's called addictedtointernetporn.com. And you can see my videos, my articles, links to my book there. You can also get in contact with me if you have any questions. I have a YouTube channel, just Noah B.E. Church. Search that on YouTube. And you can find my book on Amazon if you want paperback, or Amazon, iBooks, Kobo, Barnes & Noble if you want an ebook.
Noah Church, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge and wisdom with us today. It was absolutely fantastic talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. I always welcome opportunities to tell people more about all this.